Hi everybody, welcome to our lecture for Chapter 10 in our course. It is on servant leadership. This really is a chapter that I think is another one of those that is fairly self-explanatory. It's an emphasis on serving others, but it's important in this state and at this institution. If you're pursuing an administrative certification from Oklahoma State University, servant leadership is a massive component of what we do in here and our program. And because of that, I think it's important that you get some of the big ideas and big takeaway messages that are behind what servant leadership is, how you are supposed to serve others in your role as an administrator, and honestly what that particularly looks like. So, we are considered to be a land-grant mission university. Because of that, it is a natural built-in component in our program that we do service learning and servant leadership. It's true throughout the school districts. We have community schools in our elementary schools, and that is a Midwestern and Southern theme. It is not the case in the Northeast, even the Northwest. The community school movement really is Central America, spreading out, essentially umbrellaing down to the South, and the local communities too. When you're doing your internships, you're going to see that in a lot of the programs and a lot of the experiences that you have here. So I think this is a big idea, and I think it's something that needs to be considered. So I think it's also important to know that we're one of the few programs that has a 120-hour principal internship requirement for 2 consecutive semesters. You're not going to find that at most other locations. You're going to find an internship requirement that isn't that intense and isn't that long. Your internship requirements are going to be, or at other institutions, are going to be 75 hours for 2 semesters or 1 semester for 150 hours. The main reason it's so long at Oklahoma State is because of the service learning and community involvement portion of it. I want you to know that, and I want you to be aware of that going into your administrative internship experience, because you're going to have a lot to do, and it's going to be something that you do for a significantly extended period of time. So you're credentialing yourself in a state and an institution that values this. Texas does too, but I don't know. My experience here in my limited time has shown me that there are a lot of teachers that will end up going to Texas to teach. I haven't really found that from administrators that much, where people said, well, I can't make it as an administrator here, so I'm going to Texas. But I just want you to be aware, that's kind of one of the things that, if you do move the certification from Oklahoma to Texas, I want you to know that they're focused on servant leadership too in the community schools model, especially in middle schools too. You're going to see in Texas a lot of this K-8 versus, what we see here that's kind of a K-2, a 3-5. So that's important. They do a lot with community schools. So you're going to see this servant leadership and community partnership model is something that's very big throughout the state, and I want you to be aware of that. It's important to note that this model and this belief of servant leadership and doing what we can to serve others really came out of the literature of the 1960s and 1970s. It's not a theoretical model, it's a very prescriptive model. It's basically, we set up the study, this is how it was done, and this is what we learned. Only recently have journals focused on actual leadership, actual literature, and how servant leadership, how the literature has been published in leadership. It's more or less an action research thing, a project-oriented thing, and that's been kind of one of the focuses on it. Servant leadership emphasizes that leaders be attentive to the concerns of their followers, empathize with them when they need it, and try to nurture them when they're okay. Your job is to put followers first, empower them, and help them develop their personal capacities. So whatever your followers need, you're putting their needs first, and you're empowering them, and that's going to make you a stronger leader. You have to be focused on the greater good, which we've obviously spoke about in the ethics chapter, and ways that we can work for society and the community as a whole. So it's a great idea but I always question, would these approaches work in schools? Is this something that's going to work? Is this going to be easy for you to do if you're in a building that has 60 or 70 different people that are all individuals with individual ideas and individual contexts? Is this concept going to be fairly difficult for you to do? And I would argue, yes, I see massive challenges in fully implementing and integrating this model into an leadership program. It's difficult to make these settings work in a school system, but you can still do principles of servant leadership. I find most people say that their school exists and they have a community service model. That's something that is going to be integrated into your school experiences anyway, but it's understanding what that community service model is, what it serves, and that sort of thing in your school experiences. There are 10 characteristics of servant leadership, and that's probably the biggest idea in this chapter. If this is a model that interests you, I really want you to think about them and integrate them into your ethical platform and your papers. But you don't have to have all of these elements to be present, but you need to think about how these can work effectively in schools and make a difference in our school systems. So the first thing that you'll see is that servant leaders actually tend to be better talkers than they do listeners. The reason being is they're looking at ways to advance and build community collaboration, and they're trying to promote their vision and mission to their constituents, which in this case are the teachers that are in the building. While I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, I do understand why that has to be recognized and how that has to be recognized. I would argue that you have to be able to show that you can listen first to be effective in an administrative role. And if you can do that, that's going to help you be effective as well. Good servant leaders are empathetic and they'll be able to put themselves in the position of others so that others can understand their problems. Former successful teachers do make great principals because they understand what new faculty and staff are experiencing. They can put themselves in the role of somebody that's learning, and they're going to help them with their growth and their development in their position. So servant leaders always care about the personal well-being of their followers. They want to help them overcome personal problems, anything that can affect them at work. Teachers having personal problems does have an impact on your students. If a teacher doesn't like their learning environment, they're not comfortable where they are, you have to make sure that you can do what you can to support them, and I think that's an important part of your position as well, and that's one of your obligations and one of your requirements as well. So a good servant leader is aware of their surroundings, and more importantly, they're able to understand themselves and others, and they know how their actions have an impact on other things. One of the things that if you subscribe to this model of leadership, you can actually see how the actions impact the other people, not only in your building, but the community as well. If you believe in this community collaboration model that we've been speaking about this entire class, that's something that you need to think about, because it will have an effect on your stakeholders, and it will have an effect on how things are presented. So servant leaders must be clear and consistent with their communication messages. They allow subordinates to have input and say and make decisions and make decisions that hopefully everybody on the same team will agree with. This is the kind of the notion that you've learned about in your supervision course about the collaborative interpersonal instructional model. When you have schools that have high needs and people that have high needs, it doesn't work, and sometimes coercion might be the only approach that you're able to do, just because it's the one that's going to be the most effective and it's going to work with the stakeholders that you have. So people have the ability to be visionaries for organizations as well, because they can see the big picture. When you take a finance course, I'm always going to ask you what the 1-year, 5-year, and 10-year plan is, and it helps you see the way that the school's going to be performing in the future and kind of what it looks like. So this one might come out a little odd in the video, but I really want to stress that a person with servant leadership predicts how their actions are going to affect others, and that's kind of this notion of foresight. If you know that your actions are going to cause some sort of controversy in the future, you're at least smart enough to say this could go wrong, and this is how I intend to approach it, and what that approach is, going to look like. So, stewardship is basically owning and taking responsibility for what was given to you as a leader. If you are doing this under a true provision of servant leadership, you're going to take the fall for others, even if it's not necessarily your fault, but you're going to do it in an effort to protect other people, because you want to give credit to your teaching staff and make sure that they're getting the support, and they're getting basically the recognition they need when something goes right. So when you're helping other people, we're treating them with intrinsic value. And you're making sure that they have a clear plan. And this relates to that succession planning concept that I've been speaking about a lot. If you can grow somebody in an organization and you know who's going to come in and who's going to be the next person, that's something that you have to take into account as well. Community building is very big in this state. It shouldn't be overlooked. You have to figure out ways that you can be connected to the school. There needs to be a residual agreement that takes place so that if you're giving to the community and there are stakeholders in the community that can give back to you, you want to make sure that both people are working together and both parties are working together to create an optimal learning environment. I do believe in community building, especially in the state of Oklahoma. I will be honest with you, I did not see that this much in Pennsylvania or Ohio in my years of experience of working there. Community building is very big here, and if you plan to be an administrator in the South, I want you to be aware of the impact and the importance of community building and impacting community stakeholders. So 10.1 gives a good picture of research for servant leadership. If you want to use this in your final paper, it's something that you might want to do. I put it in the slideshow, so if you want to take a minute, I'll give you a minute to just basically glance over it. We've talked about almost all of these concepts throughout this lecture and throughout class, but if it's something you want to look at, feel free to take a minute and look at it, and it might be something that could be easily integrated into practice. So, if you want to study this, I would suggest, looking at the model of servant leadership, what it potentially looks like. It's a good conceptual framework. It can help you research and understand kind of what the research is on servant leadership and what servant leaders do in order to advance the work of others and to grow and continue a mission in their schooling system. So, we'll look at each one of these. I'll go back, I'll let you look at the model itself for a minute, but then we're going to talk about each one of these once again. You have access to all this in your book. You can kind of look at this on your own. We'll go from there. So, context and culture is everything because each organization has their own culture and the stakeholders really define what the context is of that school as an organization. Most schools are caring. Some of you will disagree with me, but schools do operate in a caring environment more than other organizations that are focused on profit optimization or profit maximization. Organizational culture makes a difference too. How experienced teachers are, how many administrators they've worked for in the past. that's part of the culture that has to be and should be observed as well. Everyone, when you're looking at leadership attributes, leaders bring their own ideas and notions in their own roles and responsibilities when they enter a position. I would argue that everybody in any class that I take has their own sort of ideas and stances on what being a leader looks like and how they would particularly be a leader in a school system. If you can put the views and opinions of others first, that's something that is a strong leader attribute and something that will carry you far if you subscribe to the model of servant leadership. If this is a model that you don't necessarily see as defining you, then I would argue this is definitely something you don't want as a high priority or something that's part of your platform. So some subordinates don't want leaders in their personal business. And I think this is a big idea too, because in servant leadership, you're creating a community. You want people to be involved with you, who you are, that sort of thing. And leaders have to be cognizant of those type of employees and kind of what they look like and sort of what they're looking for. So when you're conceptualizing ideas, you have to understand the whole idea of the organization, including all stakeholders from top to bottom. My experience has shown me that the school secretary is the one person that building principals count on when they're new to an environment, because they can tell them what their surroundings look like, they can give them a warning as to how the culture is, and I think that's important. When you come into an organization fresh, you want to come in fresh, and you don't want to let others influence or hinder your ability and your understanding of the organization, but you have to know how things function and how they work so that you can be effective in your position as well. And that's one thing big that you can do under a servant leader model. Emotional healing is important because when others do have problems, you have to give them time to address them and work with them. You have to make sure that you're available to the staff. And if you believe in helping them emotionally, you have to be able to go to them when a problem happens and there's something that you can step up and you can help them with any challenges and any issues that they have. So putting followers first is a big idea. We've already really talked about this throughout this class, but you have to put the behaviors of others before your own behaviors. I find that in education this is very, very difficult because you're ultimately going to be the one that's held accountable, but if you have good trust and good relations with your staff, you have a much better chance of accomplishing this objective as a whole, and I definitely believe that as well. So you need to know the goals of your teachers and professional staff, and you have to let them have opportunities to grow and develop into the competencies that they want, not necessarily the competencies that you believe are the best fit for them. You have to support their professional activities and development, which is why our school and our university really stresses this internship model and gives you an open-ended procedure to follow should you need to follow an open-ended procedure on it. So servant leaders have to behave ethically wherever possible. They have to act in a manner that's above everybody else, not compromise principles to achieve success. We really spoke about this in the ethics chapter, but under the servant leadership model, I think it's even equally more important than it is under other potential models as well. Empowering, they have to make sure that they're doing anything in their power to allow people to make their own decisions, be self-sufficient, and become leaders that benefit themselves and benefit the people that they're leading. I do need to stress this. I've been, in the time I've been working with school administration, I have seen that some people have amazing internships that work perfectly. Others have awful ones because they're given no freedom on anything and they're giving a principal that's just signing the form. You need to take your own initiative and know that if you're in a building where an internship isn't going to work out for you, or you're not going to have the freedom to do what you need to do during your administrative internship, I would strongly suggest you potentially seeing if you can go out of district or in district to another building. You can't fault the administrator for this if the administrator doesn't want to overly empower somebody, more or less because they're worried that something could potentially go wrong if they give too much power to somebody, but I want you to actually have the experiences of what a building principal experiences, understand what you'll be doing in an administrative role, and if you don't